Hello and welcome to this course on how to sculpt a dragon in clay. My name is Sorin Mihai. I'm a traditional sculptor specializing in creatures and characters, and I'll be your instructor for this course. This will be an in-depth tutorial made over a longer period of time, in which I'll go into a fair amount of detail. We'll go through everything you need to know about creating a dragon like this from start to finish. Dragons can be a challenging subject to sculpt, but I'm absolutely positive that anyone who follows these steps, beginner or pro, will be able to achieve their desired outcome. We'll take it step by step and I'll show you everything that goes into making a traditional sculpture from preparation to completion. We have a lot of exciting things to cover, so let's get to it. To smooth out the clay or heat it up to make it softer. This is a bigger heat gun for the times when you need to heat up the clay. This covers larger areas. Here on the left side, I've got some pliers that are going to be useful for constructing the armature. We're going to need 2 or 3 different sizes of galvanized steel wire in order to enforce the armature, and a thin wire mesh for supporting the wings. This is actually an aluminium wire mosquito net I found at a local hardware store. Otherwise it can be found in art and craft stores or on Amazon. This is the base stand, and for this I'm using a round wooden chopping board, to which I'll attach a metal pipe on a metal flange. You can see I've already marked the dots in which I'll drill the holes for the screws. This is because I want to have the dragon raised on a rock, and I need to bring the armature higher and have proper support. This black round thing is a turntable to put our sculpture on, so we can rotate it when we want to see it from different angles. Now I'd like to show you some references I've printed out with several different dragons. It can be helpful to look at these from time to time as you go along. You can draw inspiration from and help shape the direction in which you're going with your design. Now that we have the wings ready, it's time to move on to the other parts of the body. As a unit measure, I am going to take the forearm. By looking at my reference model, I can make a few remarks. The length of the dragon's neck in my reference photo seems a little short to me, and I want to make it a little longer. So I will make it the same size as my unit of measure, the forearm. So therefore now, the length of the forearm is equal to the length of the neck and to the length of the torso. To be able to tightly secure the wire mesh to the armature, I'm going to take the smallest strand of wire I have and wrap it around the armature in a sewing fashion. And I'm going to continue doing this along the total length of the wingspan. Once we have the armature covered, the real fun stuff can begin. We can start to rough out the main forms of the arms, legs, torso, head and the tail. This part of the process is really exciting because we can see how the sculpture begins to take shape and come to life. At this stage, we want to use our hands as much as we can. There isn't any need for tools at this point. We don't need to worry about any details at this point either. We'll add those later. Everything must build on what came before, and if we don't have a strong foundation to build upon, our sculpture will look wrong. We want to add bits of clay in key areas to form larger muscle shapes in the legs, by bulking out the thighs and lower leg. Do not dwell too much on these because we will come back to them and refine them later on. We just want to build up the main form so we can view the sculpture as a whole. Look at your references from time to time and constantly rotate your sculpture to see it from different angles. This will provide a new perspective and reveal any flaws or areas that need more work. Continue adding bits of clay until you feel confident that you've captured the shape you want for your dragon. If you squint your eyes, you can only see the silhouette, and that will help you tell when you've reached the volume you want. At this point, I've started working on a bit on the wings to clean up the surface with a larger loop tool. I'm doing this to prepare for the smoothing process, in which we're going to apply solvents to dissolve the surface of the clay in order to smooth it, but we're going to come to that in a later part. For now, we're just going to focus on making the surface of the back as even and as smooth as we can. The next thing I'm going to do is start working on the scale pattern on the belly, which will lead up to the end of the tail. This is the type of scale that dragons typically have on their bellies. So just draw horizontal lines in a descending pattern, meaning each line should be a little closer to the next one than the one before. I'm mostly eyeballing it, not measuring the distance exactly, although I could have, but I'm using my loop tool as a measure unit, and that works good enough. Now we're ready to start applying the textures on the back. To begin with, I'm heating up the clay on the back, and this time I'm going to imprint 2 different texture stamps. As the skin on this part of the body will be more compressed because of the movement, the scales will also become smaller and tighter. So in order to achieve that, I will be combining 2 different texture stamps. There is the other side as well, where you could keep working on your piece forever, always finding something to perfect. But we don't want to overwork it either. It's all about finding the right balance that you feel satisfied with. And that's when you know it's time to call your sculpture finished. After we've finished our sculpture, we can store it safely on a shelf. Oil-based clay is a very stable medium, especially with an armature inside. But remember to keep it away from too much heat or sun in general, which can melt the surface of the clay. And ideally, if you can, you may want to put it in a display case so it doesn't collect too much dust. Otherwise, if you ever want to use the clay for something else, you can always melt it with your heat gun to remove it from the armature and use it for other projects. If you'll want to make a permanent version of your sculpture and make multiple copies, it has to be molded and cast in a harder material like resin or polystone, but this is another subject. This sculpture would be a very complex piece to mold. It would have to be broken down into several parts to be molded and cast individually. This can be done by someone who specializes in molding or a professional foundry. If you want to do it yourself, you'll have to learn the skill of molding, but I wouldn't recommend you start learning how to mold with such a complex sculpture. The skill of molding is another type of art in itself, which also requires time and experimentation.